Scott, thank you very much. And welcome to today's webinar. We're going to go over cyber and data breach. What are some of the exposures? How do we transfer that risk? And today's presentation is going to be a high-level presentation. And as Scott mentioned, we can dive down a little further as time allows. So let's get started. The topics we're going to cover today, starting with why should we even care? What are some examples of the losses? What are some common insurance coverages that are available to us? How can we be proactive? How do we mitigate? What's available for us for pre-loss planning and training? And after we experience a loss, what providers do we select? And lastly, how is cyber insurance priced and underwritten? It's estimated that after 6 months, 60% of businesses fail after a cyber attack. Small to mid-sized businesses are the targets because we're easier targets. And according to IBM, 4,000 attacks happen each day. And again, as I stated, because we're small businesses, we are the soft and the easy targets for a breach. Let's take a look at a few examples. Here's a large retail example. I don't know if anyone had seen this article before with Eddie Bauer, but this is one of the most common ones that we see in the news. This is an attack of a point of a sale system. And imagine the resources Eddie Bauer has to protect their data. Compare that to what we have as small business owners. We are the more common attacked entities because of the sheer number of small to mid-sized businesses. This is what makes us one of the prime targets for cyber attacks. As we dive down a little deeper, what are the types of losses? What are our exposures here? And cyber losses result in costs for multiple parties. What are some of those losses? Customer service. How about the reissue of credit cards? Lost revenue, reduction of transaction. And for Eddie Bauer, what's the third-party exposure? What's the loss to them? What might Veridian seek to have collected from Eddie Bauer? This is what's referred to as a third-party loss. Additionally, what are the exposures that Eddie Bauer has first party? What is their liability there? Do they have to hire experts to determine how the malware got in and how to remove it? How about repayment to customers? Consumer notifications required when a breach happens. Eddie Bauer may even elect to pay for monitoring services for their customers as a good faith estimate to mitigate and reduce exposure. Another example, some might look at this as a brave attack on a police station, a bold move, but is it really? As we look at ransomware, it is completely random. The malware often disguises itself in an email or in a common ad. That's why making these ransom cyber attacks very prevalent. Cyber attacks are evolving. They're changed very often. And ransomware has existed for quite some time, but greatly increased in 2016. What are the implications of ransomware? Is it first party or is it a third party exposure? In this example, it's typically going to be a first party liability or exposure because the attacker isn't actually taking the data, but rather just holding it ransom. How about the business interruption? This is typically very sensitive data and is not very easily replaced. In most cases, it's recommended to just pay the fee to recover the data. Then what? Do we have to hire a forensic code analyst to determine the access point? And if it's been removed, are they out? Did the business need to notify its customers of the breach? Where do we even get Bitcoin to pay the ransom? What is Bitcoin? Think of the business interruption an attack like this could cause. Third example, I found this article an interesting read, especially as you look at the bottom here. This firm, which was attacked, had a large breach, had published articles as being experts in cybersecurity. So if you were faced with a lawsuit, would your attorney be able to handle the defense? Most of us have attorneys for our business. Can they handle the defense? Are they experienced in cyber defense? Could you afford a class action lawsuit defense or a judgment and stay in business? Expertise is needed in all stages of cyber readiness. It's needed in prevention, fighting it, remediation, and especially in defense. How does solution play a part now? What's out there for us? How do we protect ourselves and our businesses with first-party and third-party liability? Cyber and data breach is an exposure to all types of businesses. It's a risk many business owners transfer to insurance companies. Unfortunately, there's coverage for all of these scenarios. What else can we do? What else can insurance companies help provide? How about education to prevent loss? Here's a list of services available to us as business owners. Think of it as loss control for your businesses. Many insurance companies provide these types of services with their cyber and data breach. What else could your policy cover? Cyber liability insurance companies provide these services and access to specialized providers. At the time of a loss, providers can assist with the following 6 bullet points. This reduces your exposure and gets you back up and operating business as normal. How is it priced? How is it underwritten? It's not as uniform as other commercial products such as work comp, property, or general liability. But here are some rating factors that are pretty common in the marketplace today. Where some commercial products use revenue or payroll, cyber is subjective to carrier preferences. Most carriers use class of business, whereas gross revenue and electronic commerce are also some common rating factors. And by packaging this with some of the larger carriers, we can make it more affordable. It reduces cost and exposures, plus it helps with the settlement of claims and the services that are provided. Yes, there are some large value policies that are unique to business and have extensive interviews, but most common Main Street businesses only require a couple of questions, making the insurance affordable and fairly easy to obtain. Some of the considerations insurance companies have to determine what the price are listed here today. Starting at the top, if you have very little exposure or information only on the websites, it presents a very low risk. Additionally, as you put more information up onto your websites or conduct more business there, the risk will go down from low, medium to even higher risk. With the highest exposure, the bottom presenting personal information, health information, requires pretty extensive underwriting. The main takeaway I want for everyone to have today is to find a trusted advisor with experience in designing an insurance program specific to your business needs and your exposures. Scott, I kept it under 20 minutes. We can open it up to some questions. Or Mike, do you have any comments? Oops, sorry.
I think the important thing for us, can you hear me on this, Trevor?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So for those that are participating, I work with Trevor in helping to place the business. And I think the important part is each carrier is so specific in what they include and what they exclude that a very thorough analysis with an agent is going to be required to make sure it's specifically designed to your business exposures. Depending on the type of carrier you may think you have the coverage and find out that in some of the fine print there may be exclusions that you were not aware of. So it's not really a coverage that I would recommend people just go buy over the internet or buy without discussing it with somebody who's a professional in that area to make sure that all your exposures are covered and you fully understand in the event of a claim what may be covered and what may not be.
It's a great point.
And yeah, we do actually have a few questions, so I'll just throw these your way. And for everybody else, if anybody hasn't sent one in yet and wants to send one, go on ahead and do that now. So Trevor, one of the questions is, does it cost more if your network is less secure, meaning if you have like pre-existing conditions?
So the way I would answer that question is similar to what Mike was just saying, is all the insurance companies are going to have specific requirements or underwriting guidelines that they're going to need to have in place. Keep it very simple. Yes, the more exposure you have, the more exposure the insurance company potentially have will be the higher priced products that are going to come out. The more protective, the more sophisticated your systems are, then that's where you'll see the more aggressive pricing. I don't know if Mike, you've got some comments around that as well.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit of information as you think about not just cyber, but you think about your business risks at any time. They're always interested in what mitigation measures you have in place. So, for example, if you wanted theft coverage on a business, they want to know, well, do you have security cameras? What types of locks do you have? Do you have an alarm system? And that's similar when it comes to these coverages as well. What do you have in place? How often is it updated? Who's the provider of your security? Have you had a claim in the past? And if so, what mitigation efforts have you taken to make sure claims like that may not happen in the future? So they're very, very interested in who manages your systems, what their expertise is, and how often that software is updated. So there would be some information that you'd have to share in regard to that.
And another question that we have is, does it cover people who are working remote, not directly on the company's network?
I can chime in a little bit on that. One of the things we found is VPN type networks are very, very susceptible to potential hacking because of the unsecurity that may take place at people's homes. So it would cover most of the time, depending on the carrier. As long as you're using your company's network, you should be covered wherever you are. But if you guys have all tried that or done this in the past, one of the things that pops up, especially for me when I do work off-site, is where am I, and is it considered to be a trusted site or not? And depending on how I answer that when I access other internet networks, different information becomes available to me depending on how I answer the questions of how secure the internet connection is. So that would be a carrier specific thing, but as long as you're operating on your company's network, in most cases, you're probably going to be covered.
And this brings us back to Mike's original comment. It's very important to seek an advisor who is experienced in this field, because they can identify some of those exposures and make sure that you know what is covered and what will be excluded.
And then one last question here. Is there anything that isn't covered that they should know about, or anything you guys might recommend, I guess?
I can give a common one as you guys are out looking around, and it touches a little bit back to how Trevor touched on ransomware. And there are a number of carriers out there, big name companies, that specifically are going to exclude something called extortion. And that's something similar to a ransom, whereas the ransomware comes up after you go to log in and you find out that your computer's been hacked and they need this payment in order to release the data. The extortion happens sort of as upfront. In other words, they say, if you don't pay this, then we're going to do the hacking, and they require you to pay it up front rather than the ransomware, which happens afterwards. So be very, very careful in regard to whether or not that's an exclusion on the policies that you have. And if you think that's a potential risk, make sure you're seeking out an endorsement or a carrier that would offer that. But that's one that jumps out to me immediately. Another thing that I'd want to make sure that you understand is whether or not defense costs would be covered by your carrier. So in the event a lawsuit's brought forward, who pays the cost to go defend that? The remediations are also something to take very, very seriously. So different companies handle that differently based on their confidentiality and their privacy policies. But let's pretend one person felt like their data was sabotaged or taken. Different companies then may require a notification to every single customer throughout the country, even though those that had not been hacked. So think of the costs involved in potential mailers and postage and notifications and updating your websites and all this thing, sending emails to every potential customer, not just the ones that got potentially harmed. So those are the little fine things that you want to make sure you understand where your coverages are, and they can be included or excluded. So there's some identity theft things in there. There's that extortion one, fines and penalties. What about if your business has to shut down? What about the revenue that you lose? So business interruption coverages are important. Different things like that. Forensic costs to hire somebody to come in and do the investigation and the cleanup. Who pays for that? What if you get fined and have a penalty from a regulatory body? Those are some of the things that come to off the top of my head.